السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعله شخصية مثيرة للجدل بكل أبعادها، هو حفيد الشخصية الأيقونة المهاتما غاندي، والسائر على دربه، والمنتمي إلى مجموعة دعم فلسطينية، وما زال مؤمنا بالسبل اللاعنفية في حل النزاعات اليوم. مع السياسي الهندي توشار غاندي نتحدث من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعوا. في عام 1947 تم تقسيم الهند البريطانية، كما كان يطلق عليها من قبل المستعمرين البريطانيين، إلى دولتين مستقلتين هما الهند وباكستان. أثناء التقسيم وفيما فر المسلمون شمالا من الهند إلى باكستان وهرب الهندوس في الاتجاه المعاكس، تم ذبح 1,000,000 شخص على الأقل، ما أدى إلى تصدع عميق بين المجتمعين لم يتم جسره حتى اليوم بحسب المتابعين. توشار غاندي ابن حفيد المهاتما غاندي يقول: مع الأسف في أي مكان في العالم حيث يوجد صراع ضد المسلمين يتعاطف العديد من الهندوس مع الجانب الآخر، سواء أكان ذلك مبرراً أم لا. هؤلاء هم أنفسهم الأشخاص الذين يعتقدون أن المهاتما غاندي لو لم يطمئن المسلمين إلى البقاء في الهند، وأن الهند هي أرضهم أيضاً، لكان جميع المسلمين قد فروا أثناء التقسيم، ولكانت الهند تخلصت منهم. وكان الغضب الذي أثاره المهاتما وقت ذاك لدى هؤلاء هو أحد الأسباب التي أدت إلى مقتله. وقد يكون المهاتما غاندي محورياً في قصة استقلال الهند، وقد يظهر وجهه المتجعد على جميع الأوراق النقدية، ولكن في الهند في القرن 21 لم يتبقى سوى عدد قليل من الغانديين الحقيقيين بحسب حفيده توشار، إذ تم التخلي عن رسالته وبات غريبا على شعبه، وهذا أمر مأساوي للغاية، لأن أرضنا تعتمد على الوحدة بين المسلمين والهندوس. توشار غاندي ابن حفيد المهاتما غاندي وأمين إدارة مؤسسة المهاتما غاندي والناشط السلمي الذي قرر منذ طفولته أن يعتنق إرث المهاتما، يحدثنا من الداخل عن هذا الإرث ورمزيته وأثره عليه وعلى الهند اليوم.
Not as much as I would wish it manifested. It's a tough ask. It's not easy to follow in his footsteps. I know my limitations, so I do just as much as I'm capable of. There's a long way to go still till to even reach his shadow.
Do you think it's a burden?
It's not a burden, but it's a responsibility. It definitely is a responsibility. But I have never thought of it as a burden. Because if, it would have become a burden if I pretended to be something that I'm not. I have always been very frank about my abilities, and I have not led a double life.
Yeah.
Because expectations are very high from people, and if I had to live up to the expectations of the people.
Yes, this is my question here. How much challenging is it for you, Mr. توشار, to live up to a name like Gandhi?
It would have been very challenging if I had succumbed to the expectations. I never did that. I always tell people that, I'm just a descendant of a great person. It doesn't, it's not a genealogical thing. It doesn't come in my genes.
Yes, yes.
So please don't expect
the unexpected, perhaps, sometimes, yes. But we will talk about certain kind of things or virtues that the Mahatma has been known for, and how much are they manifested today. But do you think non-violence is the best way for India to achieve social and political changes in the present time?
Well, I think that non-violence is a human value. and it is as important for the survival of humanity anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's not, it cannot be confined to only India. Mm-hmm. It is a value that sustains life on earth. You see, when we talk of nonviolence, we only assume nonviolence to be the absence of war mm-hmm. or conflict. Nonviolence is much greater than that. Nonviolence is a way of life. Today, when we are so much under attack or terrified of climate change and the unpredictable, unpredictable weather and things, this is the effect of our violence against nature.
Exactly.
And so nonviolence transcends just the relationships of two human beings and goes into the entire, to nature, to environment, to everything. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that nonviolence is the only guarantee of the survival of the human race or life upon this earth.
Mm-hmm. But as far as India is concerned, mm-hmm. what about the nonviolence attitude?
We were supposed to be the inspiration for nonviolence, because it's not only Gandhi, my great-grandfather, who epitomizes it. Before him also there have been great prophets born in India who epitomized nonviolence in mm-hmm. the Buddha mm-hmm. and the Jaina faith. And so India has a closer association with nonviolence. Unfortunately, we don't live in tolerant times. Mm-hmm. We live in times of strife. We mm-hmm. live in times of prejudices. We live in time of hate. Yes. And that is manifesting itself in India also.
How do you see Gandhi's, the Mahatma's legacy in the present state of political affairs in India? As you said, intolerance is engulfing. Do you think Gandhian values and thoughts are losing relevance in the country?
In the political spectrum, definitely. Mm-hmm. In the political spectrum, he was discarded much, much earlier. He was too difficult to follow, to emulate, in a political system which was based on exploitation. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a recent phenomenon that we see the politics that is devoid of the Gandhian values. Mm-hmm. It's happened for a long time now. Mm-hmm. It will never be able to be obliterated from the social system, because wherever there is a cry for justice, wherever there is inequality, wherever there is disparity between citizens of the same country, mm-hmm. Gandhi is the only hope that even today gives hope to people who almost live in a hopeless existence. And so he will never be completely discarded mm-hmm. in the social fabric. Political fabric, he's, as everything else, he is also an exploitable commodity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, where do you believe the world is going wrong in dealing with different forms of violence?
It's this instant, the need for instant retribution. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you see, we want everything to happen instantly. Mm-hmm. And in the non-violence belief, nothing happens instantly.
Patience.
There needs to be patience, there needs to be acceptance. Mm-hmm. Today, you look at it, when we see a conflict situation, mm-hmm. the resolution part is forgotten. Mm-hmm. It's only revenge that we seek. Exactly. And Gandhi's ideology was based on the principle of resolution. Mm-hmm. And wherever resolution has been attempted, we have seen much more spectacular results than those achieved by subjugation through violence. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is where today we see a manifestation of very intense violence. It's oppressive. In the colonial times, in the imperial times, also we saw that kind of subjugation through violence, through intimidation, through oppression. In the democratic phase, which was inspired, you have these two shining examples that the world was inspired by for so long in the civil rights movement in North America, and then recently in South Africa, led by Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And you see, both have been able to bring about lasting change.
Exactly.
And then you see the number of violent conflicts that have engulfed this earth. I'm not talking about the two great wars, but there have been so many other strife situations which are equally, in their cumulative effect, equally bad. And see where that has brought us to, how polarized it has made us.
Exactly.
And so the hope even over there, even today, in today's time, is a non-violent. This conference itself is a manifestation of the hope.
The fourth annual convention,
the fourth annual
with the
convention,
Palestinian cause, and the right of return of the Palestinians.
None of us who have attended the conference are soldiers. None of us are capable of battle. And yet they see hope in our presence over here. The hope that we can only bring is very symbolic. But that gives more lasting hope than a cache of arms coming in.
And this is one of the manifestations of the Mahatma. Now, Mr. توشار, during the 75th anniversary of the historic Salt March, you reenacted the Mahatma's march by walking from Ahmedabad to Dandi with other followers. Why did you decide to reenact the Dandi March? What were you thinking about back then? And how challenging was it for you?
Since 92-93, India has been torn apart by sectarian violence. We have got back to a state of mistrust, suspicion and prejudices. And it manifests itself often in violence between Hindus and Muslims, in violence between castes, and all that has in a way threatened the idea of India that the founding fathers of our nation had envisaged. And after 2002, what happened in Gujarat, I thought that there was a requirement for a symbol of Gandhian methods to be brought back to life. And so that march that we did, we called it the March for Justice, Peace and Hope. And an achievement that I'm proud of is that on that march, on that entire route.
How long was it?
26 days. We did it exactly on the schedule that Bapu had walked in 1930. So we followed the route, we followed the timetables, we followed the schedule exactly. We rested where he had rested also. And the thing that I take pride in is that I had 90 plus Pakhtuns marching with me shoulder to shoulder, dressed in their Pakhtun uniforms, who came on my invitation from Pakistan, and we walked through Gujarat. And the people of the villages on the route, they threw open their homes to all of us. They invited the Pakhtuns into their houses with equal love. And
there was a person who looked just like the Mahatma.
Yes.
And he was leading, I believe.
He was leading, and his was a story that was remarkable also. We were all wearing fancy walking shoes, and yet our feet were covered with blisters from the second day itself. This man, who was almost 70, he walked barefoot from Ahmedabad to Dandi on hot tarmac roads, through dust roads where there were thorns on the way and things. When we reached Dandi, he had sores on his feet, but he walked barefoot, and he was remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
Mr. توشار Ghandi, allow us to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a bit more about Palestine and how much is it connected to India today and before to the Mahatma Gandhi, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. توشار غاندي ابن حفيد المهاتما غاندي وأمين إدارة مؤسسة المهاتما ألف كتابا مثيرا للجدل عنوانه فلنقتل غاندي. فما الغاية من ذلك ولماذا أثار هذا الكم الهائل من النقاش؟
Since Bapu's murder in 1948, a campaign of lies was carried out in India to justify his killing, to show as if it was unavoidable, to show that if he hadn't been killed, he would have harmed the interests of India. I grew up listening to this campaign. As I grew up, at home I would hear the other version. In public, I would hear this version. And as I grew up and I took the responsibility of my legacy, I used to be challenged by these questions that were raised against Bapu and to justify the killing. And that filled me with great anger and sorrow, because I used to wonder why the truth wasn't being told, why the truth behind the murder wasn't being told, why the campaign of lies wasn't being answered. And because that wasn't done, a few generations of Indians grew up believing that the campaign of lies was the truth. And so there was, and if you look at social media today in India, there's a lot of hatred against Bapu. And finally I decided that
you want to divulge.
I had to first confirm what I believed to be true, and then tell it to the people. And then leave it to them whether they wanted to believe it or not. And so it was...
But they thought that you were attacking a certain caste by itself.
It was mischief again. It was mischief again because...
The Brahmins.
The Brahmins. It was reported that I had blamed the Brahmins for Bapu's murder. You know, people who know me would never believe such a thing because they know that I never make generalized comments. But the fact is that every one of the accused in the Gandhi murder was a Brahmin. That fact cannot be denied also. But because they wanted to create a controversy and undermine my book, they took this excuse and they spread the lies that I had accused all Brahmins of murdering Bapu. And so there was orchestrated campaigns against me. They burnt my effigies, they burnt my books, they tried to lodge cases against me and all that. But I wasn't bothered. I wasn't bothered. I knew what I had said was true, and I knew that I was going to stand up to every word that I had written in that book. And finally they had to just give up.
Sometimes bad news is good news.
Sometimes
they
bad news.
Yeah.
I thank them very much because they pushed up the sales of my book.
Exactly. Now, allow me to take you to the Palestinian cause.
Sure.
Let's remember what the Mahatma said. Let's remind our viewers of the Mahatma's famous quote on Palestine. Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense that England belongs to the English or France to the French. It is wrong and inhuman to impose the Jews on the Arabs. Surely it would be a crime against humanity to reduce the proud Arabs so that Palestine can be restored to the Jews partly or wholly as their national home. Today also, former Union Minister and MP Mani Shankar deplored the BJP's led government at the center and the people of the country that they have abandoned Palestine and its people. Has India abandoned Palestine and its people today?
India can never abandon any people who have been wronged. It's not in our character. And that is where India stood behind Palestine like a rock throughout these years. This current cozying up to Israel is what I was talking about was the greed in the newfound love for Israel. It is not real love. It is a need for us as well as it is a need for Israel. And relationships that are basically made on greed do not last. Relationships which are of the heart and the soul. India can never abandon Palestine because India lived through what Palestine lives through now. And India knows it's too, we are too, recently independent. A 70-year time period is not a big period in the life of a nation. We cannot forget how we were colonially enslaved. And so we cannot abandon or we cannot turn a blind eye towards the pain suffered by others similarly. And so I strongly believe that this phase will go and India will come back to its senses.
Right. In a minute, sir, please. What are your dearest memories of stories you've heard about Gandhi from your family?
Well, there's so many of them. There's so many stories that I grew up with. But if there was one story that has influenced me the most is that nobody has special privileges. Everybody is equal. One cannot expect special treatment and one should not expect special treatment just because of a lineage or things, and that has been something that influenced my life.
I've read that he has a very good sense of humor.
Oh yes, he was courageous enough to say that if it wasn't for his sense of humor, he would have become a stark raving lunatic.
From India, Mr. توشار Gandhi, great-grandson of the Mahatma Gandhi and managing trustee of the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation, also a peace activist. Many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Always welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل من كل فريق العمل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.